One of the more popular requests that I've been getting for months is another critique of Renegade Cut. That is going to be very easy, as Renegade Cut has also lashed at some of my favorite movies, which I mentioned in the last video. In celebration of defending Red Dawn, I thought it would be best to add the gameplay for Homefront and its reboot, as John Milius, the director of Red Dawn, also wrote the story for the game. I would definitely take a swing at Thomas Leon's ranting about Red Dawn, because the remake of the 2012 Red Dawn is one of my favorite war movies. Okay, I realize I may have pissed off some people, but that doesn't bother me. I love that movie and I think it's good. Okay, debate me if you think otherwise. But Thomas Leon goes after the original 1984 movie, which I also like. I know I was born after the first Cold War, but I can still like the classics. So let's take a little peek at all the claims that Lefty Movie Ranter says here about a classic war thriller.
Red Dawn is a 1984 film directed by John Milius, as well as co-written by Milius and Kevin Reynolds. In an alternate 1980s, the Soviet Union and Cuba invade America. A group of teenagers flee the town and live in the woods as they prepare to become a resistance movement. In the end, the teenagers are victorious over the communists, and the United States military recaptures the rest of the country. It's a well-remembered but perhaps not well-regarded film that was very much of its time. It's also propaganda.
Oh boy, this is where it starts. It's quite easy to say that a movie is a form of propaganda, as it will include many themes that reflect the creator's views on the world. Any kind of artistic expression could be used as propaganda, either by a painting or a book or even a documentary. What Renegade ignores here is the type of left-wing propaganda seen in some movies that he himself defends, so my question to him is the same that I asked in my last video about him. Why is something like Black Panther not propaganda, but a movie like Red Dawn is? For the next 2 minutes, he explains what propaganda is and that it can be done by both the state and by private citizens. I mean, I think everyone knows that, so we don't really need to delve into that definition.
I am not demonizing Hollywood. It's a tool that can be used for the benefit or detriment of society. The point is that Red Dawn had the reach to be propaganda on a larger scale than a political pamphlet. So what aspects of the film serve right-wing goals? Well, the opening text of the film says that NATO has been disbanded and that America must fight communism alone. This is a popular isolationist nationalist prediction. The idea that globalism, a united world based on common interest, will fail.
This, from the beginning, is wrong. No one is saying that they want that to be the case in the real world. It is only giving off a dystopian setting where the world is less stable. The dissolution of an organization, which so happens to be my favorite one, is what contributes to a dystopian society. Putting that aside, if Thomas really watched the movie, he would note that there is no isolationist agenda, because the US does have allies in the fight against the Soviet Union. That is because in the movie, Colonel Tanner explains how England, Canada, and China aid the US.
The Russians reinforced with 60 divisions. Sent 3 whole army groups across the Bering Strait into Alaska, cut the pipeline, came across Canada, to link up here in the middle, but we stopped their butt cold. Lines have pretty much stabilized now.
What about Europe?
I guess they figured twice in 1 century was enough. They're sitting this one out. All except England. They won't last very long. The Russians need to take us in one piece, and that's why they're here now. That's why they won't use nukes anymore, and we won't either, not on our own soil. The whole damn thing's pretty conventional now. Who knows, maybe next week will be swords.
What started it?
I don't know, 2 toughest kids on the block, I guess. Sooner or later, they're gonna fight.
That's simple.
Maybe somebody just forgot what it was like.
Well, who is on our side?
600 million screaming Chinamen.
Well, last I heard, there were 1 billion screaming Chinamen.
There were.
And his argument is even further put into question when John Milius, like I said, also wrote the game Homefront, where Europe aids America in its fight against the Greater Korea Republic.
This is Europa News in London. The underground Voice of Freedom Network reports that American resistance fighters have joined U.S. military forces in a major offensive in occupied San Francisco at the Golden Gate Bridge. The coordinated attack may prove to be a turning point in America's guerrilla war against the Korean occupation. Meanwhile, the EU Defense Council has called an emergency session to plan support for our allies across the Atlantic.
The same thing happens in the reboot Homefront: The Revolution.
NATO needs to liberate America.
Only far-right extremists go after isolationism. No one is suggesting that this is the case here.
After the invasion, the teenagers band together in the woods. Daryl, the student council president, is depicted as a weak-willed intellectual who eventually is put in a situation in which he must betray his friends. Jed, a jock, is depicted as both morally and factually correct in all things. The far right, both fascism and right-wing American politics, historically decries intellectualism in favor of what it perceives as traditional values and strongmen like Jed.
I don't think there is any rejection of intellectualism. This scene only depicts a reaction from an individual who is unprepared for the stresses of war and how battle-hardened individuals try to cope with that with some tough love.
Red Dawn props up hyper-masculine traits that the far right believes correct. Multiple times in the film, men are admonished for showing emotion or crying. "Don't cry" is a common refrain in the film. "Turn it into something else," Jed demands, suggesting that emotions are only good for violent anger and revenge. "Avenge me" is one of the most famous lines from the film.
Another unsubstantiated claim. Where in the movie are they saying that emotions are bad for men? These scenes follow in the same category as before. If a war breaks out in your hometown and you're getting ready to fight back, will you seriously be effective at fighting if you're not battle-hardened? They're not sideswiping emotions that don't fall in line with traits that social justice warriors call toxic masculinity. In order to be ready to fight a war, you need to be desensitized to the horrors of war. That's the point of Red Dawn. It's a war movie, not a we're gonna hide in the woods and cry it out movie.
The Soviet Union is portrayed in almost Orwellian terms, creating re-education camps for civilians. Other Americans who are unwilling to join the cause of communism are executed while singing "America the Beautiful," establishing their sacrifice as patriotic and the Soviet soldiers as monstrous.
Do I really have to point out what went on in the Soviet Union? I know this guy failed history class based on what we saw in the previous video, but is he really ignorant to the fate of people who were really considered enemies of the state back in the Soviet Union?
Red Dawn spouts nationalism as justification for any action, including unlawful execution at the hands of the Wolverines.
I just have to put a stop right here. I don't think there are any nationalist traits in Red Dawn. There is a difference between patriotism and nationalism. I even did a video on that a while back. Nowhere are the Wolverines saying or doing anything that makes the US better than any other country. They're just determined to defend their home. I would call that patriotism instead of nationalism.
Propaganda requires an antagonist, like in any story. These World War II-era American propaganda posters, for example, tell a complete story. The Nazis and other Axis powers are the villains and the Americans are the heroes. Conversely, the infamous 1935 Leni Riefenstahl film Triumph of the Will has even more time to portray the Nazi Party as the hero and what it would call degenerates as the villains, even though some of the more inflammatory politics of the party are intentionally absent in the film. People resist the idea that media informs their worldviews. They don't want Red Dawn to be right-wing propaganda so much that there are fan theories and bad subreddit posts about how the film might be a misunderstood left-wing satire about nationalism in the same way that Starship Troopers was mistakenly believed to be pro-fascism instead of anti-fascism, which is what it is, by some critics during its release.
Red Dawn has theories? Would Renegade Cut please be so kind as to show me these theories instead of nitpicking? Because people don't see Red Dawn as a conservative movie. They just see it as a classic war movie, a Cold War relic.
You do it? Okay, good. Let's continue. When I was younger, I didn't have cable. As a result, my family pretty much lived at the local video store. After we watched all the new releases, we would often raid the rest of the store, which meant the old classic sections. One of my favorite films to watch was Red Dawn. It had Patrick Swayze, action, political conflict based on a potential real event. And did I say Patrick Swayze? So as a result, the original Red Dawn has a special place in my heart.
So then he talks about how John Milius wanted to give off a right-wing vibe in the film, but then he says this.
Anyway, while authorial intention is not everything, one of the key reasons for why Red Dawn can be comfortably called propaganda instead of just misguided is because of its intentions. Red Dawn, regardless of how one interprets it or misinterprets it, is violent right-wing propaganda because it was made with those politics and those intentions.
He literally did not give any reason at all. He just called it right-wing propaganda. Like, where is he going here? Even far-left activists have supported the film. Andrew Kopkind from the magazine The Nation, which is a pretty liberal magazine, said that the film gives off a convincing story about popular resistance to imperial oppression. Or is that a liberal traitor? Will we see a similar situation to when Lacey Green took the red pill?
The film's lasting impression was to inflame the nationalistic, militaristic qualities of Americans.
Are you sure about that? Because according to Peter Bart, an American journalist, the purpose of the movie was to create a sort of teenage Rambo motion picture. But considering that Leon dumps on that movie too, I don't really expect him to understand.
Red Dawn is what it seems to be. There's a saying, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. It is critically important to be suspicious of any message contained within propaganda, even if, on the whole, you might lean towards its worldview. For example, if one is a right-leaning American Republican, they should still find it in their best interest to be suspicious of Red Dawn because its messaging is manipulative enough that it allows for someone who, in broad strokes, could agree with its patriotic sentiment to accept new, radicalizing opinions. As an illustration, imagine someone who is intensely patriotic about America but has no established opinion on the war effort. Red Dawn and other propaganda takes that pre-existing patriotism and feeds new information to the viewer that suggests that patriots are also pro-war. This does not happen as consciously as one would think, and because of this, it is difficult to track, and subsequently, the effects of the propaganda are easy to dismiss by the purveyors of said propaganda, or the converted people for whom already share its inherent message and politics. The power of propaganda for some is that it can reinforce and build up pre-existing beliefs.
Did anyone grow up in the late 90s and early 2000s? Remember that time when there was widespread debate about whether violent video games and movies fueled real-life violence?
Did you know that 9 out of 10 kids play video games?
I won! Radical! I won! What if no gamer move? What if no gamer move? What if no gamer move? What if no gamer move?
But did you also know that video games cause violence?
No! Not Stanley!
It's time to play. For real.
No!
Stop your children from playing video games today.
Now that's a pro gamer move.
Before it's too late.
Tom's just basically said that watching a movie will radicalize a person. Like, listen to him once again.
If one is a right-leaning American Republican, they should still find it in their best interest to be suspicious of Red Dawn because its messaging is manipulative enough that it allows for someone who, in broad strokes, could agree with its patriotic sentiment to accept new, radicalizing opinions.
Yeah, he is following that same logic. Now this video will be hours long if I add all the arguments, so the next time someone gives off this kind of video games and movies fuel violence argument, just research the right answer and you will be able to basically destroy them.
Defenders of propaganda have multiple tactics. First, they use events that take place in the movie to justify other events that take place within the same movie. It usually goes like this. I mentioned that the Wolverines execute one of their own for treason, a legal right that they do not possess because they are not a legal entity.
I have to stop him right there because it has nothing to do with anything. I don't know why Defenders of Red Dawn would bring up the scene because it doesn't, make any case for it not being propaganda. At the same time, I don't know why people like Renegade Cut would bring it up because it holds no real significance to their argument. But this part of the video is where we truly get to see the dumb side of Renegade Cut, as that's what it unfolds into.
Nothing happens in the narrative unless it is chosen by the creators for reasons of audience manipulation. Nothing exists in a fictional world except the idea that it represents.
In case you didn't understand that, he said that all movies have the goal of influencing the minds of the audience. I'll start by saying, does Thomas know why movies were made? Movies were made to entertain people, and how a person perceives a film is based on how they are interpreted and what taste they have. To add on, doesn't that mean that the left-leaning movies he also loves also spread propaganda, including the ones he finds acceptable? Because that's basically what he's saying. Like, where does this guy get his arguments? That even ties into his second argument.
Second, Defenders of Red Dawn or other questionable films could and do claim it's only a movie, in hopes of either sweeping the conversation under the rug so that the person objecting to it will cease, or in hopes of not having to think about it themselves and relieving themselves of any guilt or lingering questions about whether or not the existence of a film they like is worth the negative consequences. Nothing is just an anything, because nothing exists in a vacuum. Red Dawn was not gifted to us by a muse. It was born out of the dangerous politics of its time and the dangerous politics of its creator.
This is the first time I've seen an internet troll respond to this line. Maybe Thomas should know that this is only a movie. Like I said earlier, movies are nothing but a means of entertainment. They are not real, and they do not happen in this world. If you are a person who takes movies seriously, then you are a very sad person. And the problem isn't the movie, it's you. You see this person right here? This is a very sad person. As the video goes on, his arguments get worse. Now, his last 2 points ramble on about how there are too many American heroes in American movies, and the last questionable argument he gives off really stems from the previous one, as well as showing how manipulative this guy is.
But if I can just put on my critic hat here for a moment, this movie is not that good. John Milius at his best was a fine script doctor and co-writer when working in tandem with more talented people, but his directorial efforts are mostly forgotten, save for Conan the Barbarian and Red Dawn, the latter for all the wrong reasons. Red Dawn is worth targeting as a piece of propaganda, as I am trying to do today, but it is not worth the moral conundrum of whether or not it is ethical to enjoy, because it is not that enjoyable. Every shot is basic, which makes sense for someone more akin to writing and not being on the set, and the acting is poor, even by Swayzean standards. So relax. It's okay to abandon your love for a movie once you realize its intentions, and it's especially easy to stop caring about something that was never particularly good in the first place.
Yeah, did you guys catch that? Subliminal messaging, which is basically a way of spreading propaganda. Listen to it one more time.
Red Dawn is worth targeting as a piece of propaganda, as I am trying to do today, but it is not worth the moral conundrum of whether or not it is ethical to enjoy, because it is not that enjoyable. Every shot is basic, which makes sense for someone more akin to writing and not being on the set, and the acting is poor, even by Swayzean standards. So relax. It's okay to abandon your love for a movie once you realize its intentions, and it's especially easy to stop caring about something that was never particularly good in the first place.
Yeah, here we get to see the fact that Thomas Leon is actually spreading left-wing propaganda of his own. When someone asks you to change your mind on something, they always do it in such a subliminal fashion. When they say, please, consider going vegan, they're actually saying they want you to stop being the alternative and just be vegan. When they say stuff like, please, be open to the idea of being an atheist, they actually want you to abandon the alternative and just want you to be an atheist. And the worst part is when they act like they're your friend and how they're looking out for you and how they have your best interests at heart. It's just really annoying. So they give lines like, it's okay to change your mind. Seriously, Thomas Leon, if you don't like this movie, just don't watch it. No one is sitting you down in front of a television screen and pointing a gun to your head to make you watch this movie. That is why you shouldn't do that to people who do like this movie. Let people watch the genre they like without being blasted for it. But not only does this prove Leon's manipulation, it also proves his hypocrisy. He calls out other studios on their supposed propaganda, but instills his own propaganda. Quite lovely, isn't it? I suppose I should make my own movie that takes left-leaning movies apart and then be called out for hypocrisy on those lines.